Merhaba, çok uzun zaman geçti. Araya İstanbul girdi, araya işim girdi, hayat girdi, başka insanlar girdi. Saçlarım uzadı. Fakat başka bir şey için YouTube'a girdiğimde kendi kanalıma girdim. Ve ilk bu video çıktı karşıma. Baştan sona izledim, dinledim. Tamamen unutmuşum. Çok hoşuma gitti ve devam etmeye karar verdim. Benim işim çok yaratıcı bir iş. Heykel yapıyorum. Sadekarlık yani kuyumculuk eğitimi alıyorum 4 yıldır. O yüzden küçük heykeller yapıp takıya dönüştürüyorum ve çok yine de büyük ve ağır olduğu için ağırlıklı olarak pirinç kullanıyorum. Mesela şu gümüş, böyle çok küçük yapabiliyorsam gümüş yapıyorum. İşte elle yapıyorum bunları. Jaguar Woman diye romanı var Lynn V'in. Çok ilham oldu bana. Ve bu Jaguar Woman'ı yaptım. Ondan esinlenerek. Altına da şöyle bir labradorit gelecek. Satıldı bu. Bu labradoritle birlikte böyle takılacak. Yakında da bilgisayarlı 3 boyutlu çizim programı kursuna katılıyorum. Bunları artık bilgisayarla çizeceğim ki istediğim kadar küçülteyim. Çünkü el ve göz hani bir yere kadar küçültmenize izin veriyor. Mesela şu 2 santimden daha küçük yapamıyorum. Şu 2 santimde bile surat ne kadar küçük. Bakın 4-5 milim kadar. Evet, devam edelim. Korkunç bir aksanım var biliyorum. Sabredin lütfen. Alışırsınız. Aksan İsviçrece'den geliyor. Biraz Türkçe, biraz Almancası, biraz İsviçrece. R'lerim falan her zaman çok korkunç. İsviçre aksanı çünkü çok gırtlaktan bir dil. Çok ilkel bir dil. Orta çağda ayrılıyor. Almanların Almancası yüksek Almanca, İsviçrelilerin Almancası orta ve alt Almanca diye geçiyor ve gramerleri falan bambaşka. İsviçrece'nin yazı dili yok mesela artık ama hala günlük yaşamda kullanılıyor. Yazıda kullanılmıyor mesela. Yazıda Almancası kullanılıyor. İsviçre'deyken konuştuğumuz dile Mundart, yazdığımız dile Schriftdeutsch diyorduk mesela. Yazı Almancası ve şive diyorduk yani Mundart. Tamam. Yeter bu kadar. Evet, Women of Wyrrd, Chapter 2, The Sacred Dream Lodge. We followed a deer track along the creek. What I first noticed was what looked like deadfall in the forest. Then I realized it was a lodge. As I came closer to it, it was clear to me that the two old women had put a tremendous amount of work into this lodge, and I was very touched. Agnes, you have built me a most beautiful dream lodge. Thank you so much. I am full, I said, holding my hand over my heart. Agnes looked at me with a twinkle in her eye. I hope you will dream well, my daughter, she said. I touched the bent willow sapling of the lodge and looked at the intricate weave they had created. It was quite a large structure. It stood taller than I am and was at least 15 feet across. Agnes walked around to the east door and called for me to come join her. Beautiful river stones had been put around the perimeter, each one carefully chosen and carefully placed so that they all fit together like a stone wall. I pulled aside the red and yellow Hudson Bay blanket that hung over the entrance, thrilled to discover the interior of my dream lodge for the first time. The inside of the lodge was covered with skins and Indian blankets. Most of the blankets looked Navajo, with their reds and blacks and whites and blues, beautiful old designs. On the floor were more blankets. In the center was a fire pit, and in it a pile of wood was burning. The inside of the lodge was very warm. Sheepskins had been piled high at one end, and the blanket sewn in the shape of a pillow so that I could lie down. I want you to be very comfortable and at ease here so that you can completely forget your body when you are working, Agnes said. We will keep the fire stoked so that you will not need to worry. Continuing to look around, I noticed glints of light, prismatic colors reflecting off the floor of the lodge, and I noticed many crystals set around in special places. Then I saw an altar at one end of the lodge. In front of it were many of my sacred things, crystals, beaded bundles, and my personal pipe on my unrolled medicine blanket. Prayer sticks, feathers, and my walking stick were placed alongside. My eyes were drawn to something hanging over the altar. It looked like a good necklace with an amulet, medieval perhaps. Carved within the amulet was a symbol that I didn't know. I looked questioningly at Agnes. Go and examine that piece hanging over the altar. It is magical, and it has to do with your work in the dream time to come. Pardon, Agnes said. I walked over to the altar, stepping carefully so as not to disturb the carefully arranged blankets. The symbol within the amulet was encased in a circle made of what looked like gold, shining a dull yellow in the firelight. Inside the circle was a symbol that looked like a Celtic cross, with a diamond in the center that reflected my face like a tiny mirror. There were other rune-like designs that I could not identify or interpret, but they seemed familiar in a way that brought tears to my eyes. I continued to gaze at the design. I touched it, felt it, my fingers running over the smooth surface. The design struck an ancient chord inside me, a memory chord, that I could not quite grasp its meaning. All I was sure of was how familiar it felt, that at some time I had worn this design, maybe even this exact necklace around my neck. Agnes, I can feel the weight of it around my neck. Agnes looked at me. She touched the edge of the circle on the design. Yes, my daughter, it is possible that you wore this a long time ago. I wondered if I should ask to put it on. Then I realized that it was somehow not yet appropriate, and at the same moment Agnes smiled to herself, as if she understood what I was thinking. There will be time, my daughter, there will be much time. You will know what is right to do. Now explore your dream lodge. I will leave you and we will eat dinner together later, Agnes said. She left the lodge. I walked around, slowly, making myself familiar with every crevice, every blanket, every piece of fur from the animal kingdom. Those sacred animals that had given away so that we might live. There was a small jaguar stool in front of the altar. I went over to it and sat down before my sacred things. I lit a candle that I found there. Then from it I lit a rope of sweet grass that began to smoke. Using an eagle feather, I spread the smoke and blessed my sacred things. Taking up sage and cedar, I also lit them. I smudged and cleared the interior of the dream lodge to the 4 directions and went outside and did the same. Back inside the dream lodge, I left the sage and cedar burning in an abalone shell next to me as I sat down at my altar and prayed to the Great Spirit. I prayed to the Creator for help on my journey into the unknown. And I asked my guides and my allies for protection. I asked for power and vision, and asked my medicine, my wolf, and the other beings that protect me and guide me to help me on this walk into the sacred dream. I asked that they protect and guide me, guide my spirit footsteps, and help me to clear away the barriers to my spirit history. I asked the spirits to call me, to help me to let go of the physical problems in my life, to let go of the world, at least long enough to understand the truth and teachings so that I would be able to understand with my heart and my soul everything that this new teacher would impart to me. I finished my prayers and then reached for the necklace and placed it around my neck. It felt heavy and oddly warm, as if it had just been worn. Suddenly I realized how sleepy I was. I went over to the sheepskins that had been laid out for me, and I lay down on them and went almost instantly to sleep. As I dozed off, I heard the voice of Agnes in my head. My daughter, the circle of truth that hangs around your neck, the ancient necklace, I want you to know that as a configuration of wisdom. I want you to know that as a configuration of wisdom. Think of the four directions, the crosses that represent the four directions within the circle. See into your far memory. Think back to a time before you knew me, a time before you knew America. Think back a long way. Breathe deeply and completely relax your body. Think back a long way. See the tunnel. It is forming at the back of your mind, a tunnel of darkness that spirals down and down. Will your consciousness into that tunnel. Know that I will protect you. Move with trust and clarity, and know that no harm could possibly ever come to you in this lodge of your dreams. Let your consciousness wander and explore the unlimited dimensions of your mind and your knowing. Look into your subconscious and let it provide you with the trail that you need to follow. See the light way down at the end of this spiraling sacred tunnel, and move toward the light. Know that you will come to that light, and for a time your consciousness will encompass that light. You and your consciousness and that light will become one. For a long while there was a silence and then the sound of a high wind. I felt weightless. As you journey toward that light, see in front of your mind's eye the amulet that rests on your chest. Focus your attention on the center of the cross. That's right, my daughter. There is a mirror-like diamond at the center. See the reflection of your own eye looking back at you, and look into that eye steadily and long. She paused a moment and then went on. As you look into the eye of your own being, the eye of your ageless spirit, move your consciousness into the eye, right into the pupil. That's right, my daughter. You are beginning to see with the eye of the cross. Now look out into the world through that eye. What is it you see? Slowly, Agnes's voice began to fade, and I realized that I must have merged with the light I had seen in the distance, because no longer was I in the tunnel. I was looking out into a vast green countryside that was completely unknown to me. The trees looked like oaks, maybe king oaks and alders. There was unfamiliar underbrush with red berries and lots of clover. It was quite cool and damp. But as I looked down, I realized I was wearing a long dress, its bodice high and tight, and a flowing cape of velvet that was lined with a very warm material like wool. I was walking quickly down a path next to a river, a narrow river, and I was looking for someone. I obviously knew where I was going. I looked down at my hands. They were very young. There was a beautiful ring on my finger, a ruby. I looked down at it, caressing the smooth stone with my fingers. I looked ahead, pulled the hood of my cape over my hair, and moved on with a sense of urgency, as if I were late for a meeting with someone. The rolling hills were covered with deep green grass, and the air smelled of damp earth. There were no houses in sight. It did not feel like the wilderness, but I felt as though I was out in the countryside. I also felt strongly that someone was waiting for me. I could not imagine who. I had no idea where I was, but an instinct inside me told me where to go, so I followed it as if it were the most natural thing to do. I wondered what country I was in. It felt familiar and yet very foreign to the rolling plains of Manitoba. Out of the mist that lay over one area of the green meadow, I heard a startling sound. At first I stopped, not knowing what it was. Then I realized it was a woman's cry. I looked up toward the crest of the hill that loomed through the mist. Silhouetted against the low-hanging sun stood a beautiful young woman, her auburn hair flowing back in the sunlight. She raised her hands to the sky as if she were praying to a sun god. She uttered another scream, sounding like a bird of prey. A moment later, a peregrine falcon with a huge wingspan circled above her. He screamed a reply to her, and then, with his wings tucked, headed for her right arm, which was wound and tied in leather. As the falcon approached the woman, he put his talons out in front of him, flapped his wings, and landed gently on her arm. Woman and bird looked into each other's eyes. Very slowly she raised her other arm and caressed the top of the bird's head with a feather held in her hand. He softened and fluffed his wings and began to preen himself. The woman was very definitely his mistress. Never had I seen a falcon behave so obediently. This mysterious woman had a loving, respectful relationship with the bird. I could tell that she had never abused the bird, nor had the bird ever attacked her. One could see by their air of mutual respect that there was no harm between them. Still carrying the bird on her arm, the woman walked down the hill and disappeared into the forest. There was a crackling sound, and suddenly the image faded, and I was back in Manitoba, lying in the dream lodge. Agnes and Ruby were smudging me with cedar smoke, and I lay there wide-eyed. The feeling of being the girl in the cape and seeing the woman with the falcon had been so strong that I was confused about where I really was. "Agnes, I don't know if I can do this," I said. My body felt cold and stiff, as if my blood had stopped flowing. Agnes stroked my forehead with her eagle feather. "That's what the woman was doing with her falcon," I exclaimed, trying to sit up. Ruby pushed me back on my pillow and lifted the necklace from around my neck. Agnes took it from her and hung it back over the altar. "Always replace the necklace when you are finished dreaming. It is a dream necklace and very sacred to the sisterhood. While you wear it, your spirit will want to dream walk," Agnes told me. "Now, that woman, what falcon?" she asked. "Start at the beginning and take your time." I went back slowly into my mind and recalled my dreaming in words for her. The old woman nodded as I continued. "But it hurts to come back into this body," I said, rubbing my legs, "and I wasn't gone very long." "Oh," Agnes said, looking up at the moon shining through the smoke hole in the roof of the lodge. I was astounded that it was dark already. "How can that be? Hours must have passed. Does that mean that time takes longer in the dream?" I asked. "It means that time is not the issue here. Time is irrelevant, shall we say." Agnes and Ruby smiled knowingly at each other. I looked up into their faces, at that moment so familiar and yet so strange. "I am much younger, perhaps only 13 or 14, in this other life. How can that happen?" I asked. "It doesn't matter. Your spirit has come of age even in that lifetime. You may seem physically younger, but your capacity to learn and grow is the same as an adult's. It often happens that way. But come now, let's eat something, and then you must sleep," Agnes said, helping me up. Chapter 3. The Lady in the Mist. Whoever carries the strong dreams wakes up in a new world. Here the air is clear, like bright fire, surrounded by a darkness that nourishes us. The next day I spent resting, helping Agnes repair her smokehouse, which needed new hinges on the door, and getting to know my dream lodge even more intimately. The lodge was becoming precious to me, and I wanted to spend time blessing it and caring for its presence. That night I entered into another spirit journey. This time I began to feel a rhythm to the sounds of nature that were foreign to me. I had a sense now of being an older girl, probably in Europe or England. I thought because of the leafy green trees and green fields with low stone walls. It felt like centuries ago. I was a lonely girl named Catherine, of good blood, able to read and cipher, and with a great thirst for knowledge. I knew that the woman with the falcon I had seen before was important to me. There was a great mystery in my life, echoed by the mist that lay over the hills and forest groves. I felt slightly uneasy, but I knew more about myself this time and where I was going. I knew my family was connected to the royal court in some way and that I was much alone these days. As I dreamed, I moved more deeply into a sense of the language I spoke as Catherine. I suddenly noted a profound shift in my psyche as I began to feel as she had felt so long ago. It was as if I had dropped into an ongoing story with no beginning and no visible end. It was late in the day as I rode my good horse down by the shore of Collingham's lake to watch the setting sun. This lake had always been my passion and my friend. She was mine from earliest remembrance, and I shared her with no one. None of the people living round about had reason to go there, so I was startled to see a woman at the end of the jetty. Tall and slender and covered in a long cape, she stood looking toward the setting sun. I rode my horse down to the edge of the sand. The way she stood there, so still, gazing out across the water made her seem alone, proud and powerful in a mysterious way. Something kept me from running down the jetty to speak to her. She did not turn to look at me. I do not know if she even saw me. I sat down quietly on a little grassy patch near the sand, my horse grazing beside, and watched her. She stood like a statue in the encroaching darkness. The only movement was from her cloak blowing gently in the evening breeze, its grayness blending with the fog and mist that began to rise from the water. I was fascinated by this woman. I knew that I had never seen her before. She did not look like a woman who lived nearby. I stayed later than usual until the sun was off the horizon. The red and orange sunset had faded from the sky, and darkness was near. I knew being out like this would cause me trouble at home, but I was eager to see what this woman would do, where she would go when she left the jetty. I continued to stare out after her into the moonlight, but I soon realized with a start that she was no longer there. She had not walked to the end of the jetty and gone down along the shore. I had been watching practically without blinking. She had not escaped my gaze, and I could not imagine where she had gone. An eerie feeling came over me. I stroked my horse's nose for comfort, mounted with a spring to my stirrup, and rode at the dead gallop back home. My mother was summarily angry when I arrived, and she sent me to my bedchamber without a proper meal. I sat in the dark, looking out the window, watching the trees sway in the night breeze. I thought about the fog that had come in over the lake and about the strange lady who had seemed to fade away into the fog. That night I dreamed that a woman was to become my teacher. I did not know what kind of teacher she would be, but I did know that she was wise and kind and eager to help me. I sensed that my life was going to be difficult and that I would need her most dearly. Why had I dreamed of such a woman? Who could she possibly be? Even stranger, why was she carrying a falcon on her arm, as my father did when he went out to hunt? I remembered the lady with the falcon I had seen on the hill. I could not imagine a woman handling falcons the way my father did. The thought of her was frightening, yet enthralling to me. I was entranced with the mystery surrounding this woman. Perhaps I was just making her up. Perhaps it was all just a dream. Maybe the woman I had seen standing on the jetty had never existed either. I waited impatiently all day, thinking of nothing but riding my horse back to the lakeshore at sunset. I knew I could not stay as late as I had before, but I thought I might get a glimpse of her. This time I would go up to her and say a word or two. Late that afternoon, after I had done all that was required of me, I went out to the stable and asked James, the stableman, to saddle my horse. He told me my horse was lame and said I had best not ride this day. For a moment I thought he was lying to me, that my mother had told him not to let me ride out alone. I ran into the stall and saw that indeed my horse was very sore. James said that it was a stone bruise. I was not to worry myself. He would be fine in a day or two, and I should leave him alone and let him heal. I left the stable in a great flurry and hid against the walls of the house, behind the bushes of heather, so that no one would see me. I caught my breath and considered what to do. Maybe I could get to the lake without my horse. No one was near, so I ran down the road, out the gates, and out of sight. I knew I was going to have to run most of the way, lifting my skirt to my knee in a most unseemly manner to get there in time, only to run around and come back right away, but that was fine with me. As I ran down the road, I suddenly remembered a path my father had shown me years past that led over Fletton's Hill by the old Saxon Tower. I would be able to arrive at Cullingham's Lake a little sooner, perhaps, and see from what direction the woman came. A half hour later I got to the top of Fletton's Hill. The rubble of the ancient Saxon tower lay jagged against the sky like broken teeth. I had a view of nearly the whole of the lake. I looked around carefully for movement, but the lakeshore was deserted. I thought I should go home at once, but there was an urge of some kind inside me, an overwhelming pressure to keep going. From the corner of my eye, I sensed movement on a hillside opposite. Looking in that direction, I saw the shadowy form of a woman standing proudly with her arm held up toward the sky. I realized by her posture that this was the lady I had seen by the lake. I heard a piercing scream as I watched the peregrine falcon circle down from the darkening blue sky to the woman's outstretched arm. She turned and disappeared into a light mist floating over the hill. As the woman disappeared, I began to run after her. In minutes I reached the top of the hill where I had last seen her. Eagerly I looked down to the other side. For a moment I saw only a lush, verdant pasture and fog rolling in from the west. Then a movement and a splash of red caught the corner of my eye. The woman Falcon, still perched on her arm, was walking around a low, cobbled wall toward a small, stone cottage at the end of the path. High flowers surrounded her, and finally several elms and alders obscured her from view. I started running down the hill. As I reached the path she had been on, I saw her enter the cottage and close the sky blue door behind her. I ran up the path through a garden to the cottage. The hedges and surrounds were the roses and holly.